I watched my mother-in-law push the crystal wine glass toward me across her polished mahogany table and smile with all the warmth of a snake. "Rachel, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "why don't you help Maria in the kitchen? I think that would be more appropriate for someone with your background." But what Carol didn't know, what none of them sitting at that table knew, was that in exactly 3 days, I would become the landlord of the building where my sister-in-law's precious boutique operated. Welcome to Martha's Stories, where I share real-life experiences that changed everything. If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how I got here. My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 38 years old, and I've been a registered nurse at Seattle General Hospital for 15 years. I met my husband David at a hospital fundraiser 7 years ago. He was charming, kind, and everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony that his family barely attended. David came from money. Real money. His father had built a successful chain of luxury hotels before passing away when David was in college. His mother, Carol, took over managing the family's remaining real estate investments, and his older sister, Amanda, ran a high-end boutique in downtown Seattle that catered to wealthy clients. David, to his credit, had chosen to become a high school teacher because he actually wanted to help people. His family never let him forget that he'd wasted his potential. But me? I grew up in foster care. I was placed in the system when I was 8, after my mother died, and never got adopted. I aged out at 18 with nothing but a GED and a burning determination to make something of myself. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through nursing school. Every dollar I earned, I saved or spent on education. I didn't have family money or connections. I just had grit. Carol made it clear from day one that I wasn't good enough for her son. At our wedding, she wore black. During the reception, she told several guests that David was going through a phase and would come to his senses eventually. Amanda was worse in some ways because she pretended to be nice to my face while undermining me behind my back. The night that changed everything started like dozens of others before it. Carol had invited us to her penthouse in Belltown for what she called a small family dinner. When we arrived, I realized small meant 12 people, including Amanda, her husband Brandon, and several of Carol's wealthy friends from her country club. I had come straight from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I was exhausted, but I'd stopped home to change into a simple navy dress, the nicest one I owned. When Carol opened the door, her eyes swept over me with barely concealed disdain. "Rachel," she said coolly, "I see you've decided to dress," casually. I looked past her into the living room and my stomach dropped. Every other woman was wearing designer cocktail dresses and jewelry that probably cost more than my car. I felt David's hand squeeze mine reassuringly, but even he looked uncomfortable. The first hour was bearable. I sat quietly, sipping water while everyone else drank expensive wine and talked about their recent trips to Paris, their investment portfolios, and their plans to buy vacation homes in the Hamptons. I had nothing to contribute to these conversations, so I just smiled politely and tried to be invisible. Amanda was holding court at one end of the table, showing off photos of her boutique's latest expansion. "We're opening a second location in Bellevue," she announced proudly. "The lease agreement is already signed. It's going to be absolutely stunning." "That's wonderful, darling," Carol beamed. "The Morrison women have always had such excellent business sense." I felt the pointed exclusion like a slap. I was a Morrison too now, at least on paper, but clearly, I didn't count. Then came dinner. Carol had hired a catering staff for the evening, and they brought out course after course of elaborate French cuisine. When they began serving the main course, Carol suddenly stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. "Rachel," she said, her voice cutting through all other conversations, "I've been thinking. You must feel rather out of place here with all this business talk. Why don't you go help Maria in the kitchen? She could probably use an extra pair of hands, and I'm sure you'd be more comfortable there." The table went completely silent. I felt my face burn as everyone turned to stare at me. David started to object, but Carol cut him off. "Honestly, David, you know how Rachel grew up. She's a working-class girl. I'm sure she'd prefer to be useful rather than sitting here listening to conversations about things she doesn't understand." Amanda laughed, a crystalline sound that made my skin crawl. Mother has a point. No offense, Rachel, but when we're discussing commercial real estate and investment strategies, you do seem a bit lost. One of Carol's friends, a woman dripping in diamonds, nodded sympathetically. It's not your fault, dear. Not everyone has the education or background for these kinds of discussions. I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his mother and sister that they were being cruel and inappropriate, but he just sat there, his face red, his eyes fixed on his plate. He opened his mouth once, then closed it again without saying anything. And that's when I knew. My husband, the man who'd promised to love and protect me, didn't have the spine to stand up to his family. Not even when they were humiliating his wife in front of a room full of people. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking slightly as I placed my napkin on the table. You know what, Carol? I think I will excuse myself, but not to help in your kitchen. I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Carol's fake concern. Oh dear, did I offend her? I was just trying to make her feel more comfortable. The laughter that followed me out the door was like acid in my ears. I took the elevator down 30 floors and walked out into the cold Seattle night. It was raining. Of course, it was always raining in Seattle, but I didn't care. I walked for blocks, my dress getting soaked, my heels clicking against the wet pavement, tears mixing with the rain on my face. I ended up in a 24-hour diner near Pike Place Market. The waitress, a kind older woman with tired eyes, took one look at me and brought me a cup of coffee without asking. "Rough night, honey?" she asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak without breaking down completely. I sat in that diner for 3 hours, my phone buzzing constantly with messages from David. I didn't read them. I just stared at my coffee and tried to process what had happened. My mother-in-law had essentially called me poor white trash in front of a dozen people, and my husband had said nothing. My sister-in-law had laughed at me, and I had just taken it and walked away. When I finally went home, David was waiting up. He tried to apologize, to explain that his mother didn't mean it the way it sounded, that I was being too sensitive. I didn't argue with him. I just went to the bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, everything changed. I had the day off from work, so I slept in, emotionally exhausted from the night before. Around 11, there was a knock at the door. A man in an expensive suit stood there with a briefcase. "Rachel Morrison?" he asked. "Yes. My name is Thomas Green. I'm an attorney with Green & Associates. May I come in? I have something very important to discuss with you." I let him in, confused and still half asleep. David had already left for work, so we sat alone in our small living room. Thomas opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Mrs. Morrison, I've been trying to locate you for the past 3 months. We finally found you through your marriage records." He paused, looking at me seriously. "Did you know a man named Harold Chen?" The name hit me like a physical blow. "Harry," I whispered. "Yes, I knew Harry. He ran the foster home where I lived from age 12 to 18. It hadn't really been a foster home in the traditional sense. Harry was a wealthy businessman who never married or had children. Instead, he opened his large home to foster kids who had aged out or were about to age out of the system. He gave us a safe place to live while we finished school or got on our feet. He never asked for anything in return. Harry had been especially kind to me. He'd helped me apply for scholarships, drove me to nursing school interviews, and always told me I was capable of anything I set my mind to. When I moved out at 19 to start my nursing program, he'd hugged me and said, "You're going to do amazing things, Rachel. And remember, you're always welcome here." I'd visited him regularly for years, but about 3 years ago, I'd gotten so busy with work and my relationship with David that my visits became less frequent. The last time I saw Harry was at my wedding. He'd been in a wheelchair by then, but he'd made the trip to see me get married. 6 months later, I got a message that he'd passed away. I'd been in the middle of a crisis at work and couldn't even make it to his funeral. The guilt had eaten at me ever since. "Mr. Chen passed away 2 years ago," Thomas said gently. "I'm sorry for your loss. But Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Chen named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" Thomas pulled out document after document. Mr. Chen was an extraordinarily wealthy man. He made his fortune in tech investments in the 1992 and early 2000s. He was worth approximately $85 million at the time of his death. The room started spinning. 85 million? Yes, and he left all of it to you. The reason it's taken so long to finalize is that Mr. Chen's estate was extremely complex. Multiple properties, investment portfolios, trusts. We've been working through the legal requirements for the past 2 years. But as of yesterday, everything has been transferred into your name. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a bank statement. The number at the bottom had so many zeros I had to count them 3 times to believe it was real. Among the assets, Thomas continued, are several commercial properties in the Seattle area, office buildings, retail spaces. I have a complete list here. He handed me another document. I scanned through it, my hands trembling. And then I saw it. 412 Pine Street. The address where Amanda's boutique operated. Harry had owned that building, which meant I now owned that building. I started laughing. It was probably inappropriate, but I couldn't help it. My mother-in-law had humiliated me for being poor just 12 hours ago, and now I was worth more than her entire family combined. Mrs. Morrison? Thomas looked concerned. Are you all right? I'm fine, I managed to say. I'm just processing. This is a lot. I understand. Take your time. I'm here to help you through the transition. You'll need to make some decisions about the properties, the investments, and there are some charitable foundations, Mr. Chen established that need oversight. We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. By the time Thomas left, my head was spinning with information about accounts, properties, trusts, and legal documents. But one thing was crystal clear. I was now a very, very wealthy woman. When David came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. He took one look at my face and immediately asked what was wrong. I told him everything. About Harry, about the inheritance, about the $85 million that was now sitting in accounts with my name on them. His face went through about 15 different expressions in the span of 2 minutes. Rachel, this is incredible, he finally said. We're set for life. We can quit our jobs, travel, do anything we want. We? I said quietly. Well, yes, we're married. This is community property. I looked at him for a long moment. Where were you last night, David? When your mother told me to go work in the kitchen? When your sister laughed at me? Where were you? His face flushed. Rachel, come on. You know how my mother is. If I'd argued with her, it would have just made things worse. Worse for who? Worse for you? Because it couldn't have gotten much worse for me. I said I was sorry. No, you didn't. You said I was being too sensitive. There's a difference. We argued for hours that night. David couldn't understand why I was still upset about the dinner when we'd just inherited a fortune. I couldn't understand how he could think money fixed what his family had done to me. I didn't tell him about the building, about the fact that I now owned his sister's boutique location. I wanted to think about that on my own first. Over the next few days, I met with Thomas several more times. He introduced me to financial advisors, property managers, and accountants. I learned everything I could about my new assets, and slowly, a plan began to form. I wasn't going to announce my inheritance. I wasn't going to show up at the next family dinner wearing designer clothes and jewelry. That would be too easy, too obvious. No, I was going to do something much more satisfying. I started with Amanda's boutique. I learned that her lease was coming up for renewal in 2 months. The previous landlord, some management company that Harry had hired, had always been lenient with her. She'd been late on rent multiple times, had made unauthorized modifications to the space, and had generally treated the property like it was her own. I instructed my new property manager, a competent woman named Lisa, to handle the renewal by the book. No special favors, no family discounts. Market rate rent, which had gone up considerably in the past 5 years, and strict adherence to all lease terms. Lisa called me a week later. Amanda Morrison is demanding to speak with the building owner. She's very upset about the new rental terms. Tell her the owner is unavailable, I said. But everything in the renewal offer is standard and non-negotiable. I also learned that Carol's penthouse wasn't actually owned by her. She was renting it from a luxury property management company. The building itself was owned by a trust, and through some digging, I found out that trust was about to be sold. The current trustee was retiring. I bought it. The entire building. It cost $18 million, which was barely a dent in my new net worth. Suddenly, I was Carol's landlord too. The beautiful thing about all of this was that nobody knew. The properties were held in a trust with a legal name that gave no indication of who owned it. Lisa managed everything, and she was bound by confidentiality. To Amanda and Carol, I was still just David's working-class wife who worked as a nurse. The next family dinner invitation came 3 weeks after my inheritance was finalized. This time, it was at Amanda's house, and it was to celebrate the expansion of her boutique. I almost declined, but then I thought better of it. I wanted to see this. We arrived to find the same crowd as last time. Carol was there, of course, holding court and talking about a charity gala she was organizing. Amanda was showing off photos of her planned Bellevue location. The lease is being finalized any day now, she was saying. The landlord has been a bit difficult lately, but Brandon is handling it. I sipped my water and said nothing. Carol noticed me and gave me a thin smile. Rachel, how nice of you to join us. How is your little job at the hospital going? It's going well, I replied evenly. I actually enjoy my work. How noble, she said in a tone that made it clear she thought it was anything but. Not everyone can be satisfied with such a modest life. Amanda joined us, champagne glass in hand. Mother was just telling me about some investment opportunities. Maybe you could pick up some extra shifts at the hospital, Rachel. You might be able to invest a little money yourself. The condescension was breathtaking, but I just smiled. Maybe. The evening progressed much like the last one. Conversations about money, investments, and luxury vacations that I wasn't invited to join. David tried to include me a few times, but his efforts were half-hearted at best. Then, Amanda's phone rang. She looked at the screen and frowned. "Excuse me, I need to take this." She stepped out onto the balcony, and we could all hear her voice getting louder and more agitated. When she came back in, her face was pale. "That was the property management company for the Pine Street building," she said. "They're refusing to negotiate on the lease renewal. They want market rate, which is almost double what I've been paying." I told them that's insane, but they said those are the owner's terms. Carol frowned. "Well, who owns it? Surely you can speak with them directly." "It's some trust. They won't tell me who's behind it. This is ridiculous. I've been a perfect tenant for years." I nearly laughed but managed to turn it into a cough. "Can you afford the increase?" Carol asked. Amanda bit her lip. "Not easily. It would cut into our profits significantly, and we were counting on keeping our rent stable for the Bellevue expansion. Perhaps you should try to negotiate again. Offer something in exchange." I tried. The property manager said the terms are final. I excused myself to use the bathroom, mostly to hide my smile. When I came back, Brandon had arrived, and he was deep in conversation with Amanda. He looked stressed. "The Bellevue deal fell through," I heard him say. "The landlord there decided to lease to a different tenant." Amanda's face crumpled. "What? But we already planned everything. We ordered inventory. We hired new staff." "I know, but there's nothing we can do." What they didn't know was that I'd also bought that building last week, and I'd instructed Lisa to lease it to a different retailer, one who wasn't family. Nothing illegal, nothing vindictive, just business. Over the next month, I watched from a distance as Amanda's perfect life started to crack. She couldn't afford the new rent on Pine Street, and she couldn't expand to Bellevue. Her boutique was still profitable, but barely. The stress was showing. Carol was having her own problems. The building management company for her penthouse, which was now me, had notified all tenants that they would need to comply with updated building codes. Her unit required some modifications that would cost about $50,000. She was furious, of course, but she had no choice. The rules applied to everyone. Meanwhile, David and I were having serious problems. He couldn't understand why I hadn't told his family about the inheritance. He thought we should be living in a mansion, driving luxury cars, taking extravagant vacations. "We have the money now," he kept saying. "Why are we still living like we're poor?" "We were never poor," I corrected him. "I work for a living. There's a difference between being working class and being poor. You know what I mean." "Do I? Because it seems like you've absorbed your family's values pretty well. Last month, you thought my nursing job was noble. Now you're embarrassed that I'm still working." He denied it, but I could see the truth in his eyes. Having money had changed him, made him more like his mother and sister, or maybe it had just revealed who he'd always been underneath. The breaking point came at yet another family dinner. This one was at a restaurant, Carol's Treat. Except it wasn't really her treat because I'd learned that she'd been struggling financially for months. Her investment income had dropped significantly, and she was living beyond her means to maintain her lifestyle. Amanda showed up looking haggard. Her boutique was barely hanging on. The increased rent had forced her to cut staff and reduce inventory. Brandon looked even worse. Their marriage was apparently suffering under the financial stress. Carol kept making subtle digs at me throughout dinner. Comments about how some people were content with simple lives while others had ambition. How breeding and background mattered in business. How you could always tell when someone wasn't raised with proper values. Finally, I'd had enough. "Carol," I said, my voice cutting through her monologue, "I've been meaning to ask you something. How is your penthouse working out? Have you finished those code compliance modifications?" She blinked, surprised that I'd dared to interrupt her. "It's fine. Expensive and unnecessary, but fine. The building's new management is completely unreasonable." "Are they? From what I understand, the codes are for safety. Seems reasonable to me." "Well, you wouldn't understand the complexities of luxury property management. Actually, I think I understand it quite well." She laughed, that dismissive sound I'd come to hate. "Rachel, dear, you rent a small apartment and work at a hospital. Trust me when I say you don't understand these things." "I own 3 hospitals, actually," I said calmly. The table went completely silent. "What?" Carol said. "3 hospitals. Well, I'm a major shareholder in the corporation that owns them, which amounts to the same thing. I also own 17 commercial properties in the Seattle area, including the building where Amanda's boutique operates and the building where you live, Carol." Amanda's fork clattered to her plate. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the documentation Thomas had prepared for me. Bank statements, property deeds, all of it. 2 years ago, I inherited $85 million from a man named Harold Chen. You might remember him, David. He came to our wedding, the older gentleman in the wheelchair. David looked like he'd been punched. Harry left me everything because I was one of the dozens of foster kids he helped over the years. He didn't have biological children, so he left his fortune to the young woman he'd watched grow up. The woman who, as Carol put it, has no breeding or background. Carol's face had gone from red to white. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Amanda, would you like to call your property manager right now? Ask her who owns 412 Pine Street. The owner's name is Morrison Trust, by the way. I kept my married name for business purposes." Amanda's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. "And Carol, feel free to check with your building management. Same trust, same owner, me." "This is impossible," Carol whispered. "What's impossible is that you treated me like trash for 7 years because I grew up in foster care. You made assumptions about my worth based on things that had nothing to do with who I am as a person. And your son," I looked at David, "sat there and let you do it." "Rachel," David started, but I held up my hand. "I've spent the last month watching both of you struggle with the consequences of your own choices. Amanda, you've been a terrible tenant. Late payments, unauthorized modifications, complaints from other businesses in the building. When I took over management, my team simply enforced the lease terms that were already in place. That's not cruel, that's business. And Carol, your penthouse was never yours to begin with. You were always a renter. But you acted like you owned the place, treating people like staff, making comments about breeding and class. Well, now your landlord is the working-class girl you sent to the kitchen." "You did this on purpose," Amanda said, her voice shaking with rage. "You've been sabotaging me." "No. I've been running my properties professionally. You sabotaged yourself by assuming you'd always get special treatment." I stood up and placed my napkin on the table. "I'm done with these dinners. I'm done with this family's constant put-downs and assumptions. And David, I'm done with a husband who values his mother's approval more than his wife's dignity." I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Carol's voice rising in panic and Amanda's tears, but I didn't look back. The divorce papers were filed the next week. David tried to fight it at first, claiming he was entitled to half of my inheritance. My lawyers, who were excellent and expensive, pointed out that the inheritance was received during the marriage but was a gift specifically to me, which made it separate property under Washington state law. He got nothing except the apartment we'd shared, which I let him keep. But here's what I did with that money. I started a foundation in Harry's name. The Harold Chen Foundation for Foster Youth provides scholarships, housing assistance, and job training for young people aging out of foster care. We help hundreds of kids every year. Kids who remind me of myself at 18. I also established a program at Seattle General Hospital offering full scholarships to nursing school for anyone who commits to working in underserved communities for at least 5 years after graduation. And yes, I kept my job as a nurse. I still work 3 shifts a week because I love what I do. Money didn't change that. As for Amanda's boutique, she eventually couldn't afford the market rate rent and had to close. I offered the space to a young entrepreneur, a former foster kid from Harry's program, who opened a successful small business there. Last I heard, Amanda is working retail at someone else's store. Carol had to move out of her penthouse. She's living in a much more modest condo now, still trying to maintain her image while living on a budget for the first time in decades. And David? He's remarried, to a woman from a good family with the right background. I saw the announcement in the paper. I hope he's happy, I really do, but I don't think about him much anymore. 6 months after leaving that restaurant, I was sitting in my new office, reviewing scholarship applications for the foundation, when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's personal." I looked up to see Amanda standing in the doorway. She looked different. Thinner, older, more worn down, but also somehow more human than I'd ever seen her. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. We sat in silence for a moment. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "A real one. For everything. The way I treated you, the way I laughed at you, the way I enabled my mother's cruelty. It was wrong." Yes, it was. I've had a lot of time to think over the past few months. About privilege and assumptions and how we treat people. Losing the boutique was devastating, but it also opened my eyes to how the world works for people who don't have safety nets. "What do you want from me, Amanda?" "Nothing. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and to tell you that what you're doing with the foundation, helping foster kids, it's really incredible. Harry would be proud." "You knew Harry?" She nodded. "He came to several of our family events over the years. He tried to talk to me once about my boutique, offered some business advice. I brushed him off because I thought he was just some random old man. I didn't know who he was or what he'd accomplished. I made assumptions, just like I did with you." After Amanda left, I sat at my desk for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and growth and second chances. I thought about Harry, who'd given me a second chance when I was a scared kid in the foster system, who'd seen potential in me that nobody else had. That evening, I attended a graduation ceremony for the first cohort of nursing students in our scholarship program. 23 young people, many of them from backgrounds similar to mine, receiving their nursing degrees. They were crying and hugging their families, filled with hope and pride. One of them, a young woman named Keisha, gave a speech about how the program had changed her life. "I thought I'd never escape poverty," she said. "I thought I'd always be limited by where I came from. But someone believed in me. Someone gave me a chance, and that changed everything." As I watched Keisha accept her diploma, I realized something. The best revenge wasn't humiliating Carol at a dinner table or forcing Amanda to close her boutique. The best revenge was proving that worth has nothing to do with breeding or background or how much money your parents had. The best revenge was becoming someone who opens doors for others instead of slamming them shut. Someone who sees potential instead of pedigree. Someone who judges people by their character and not their bank account. Harry taught me that. And now, with the fortune he left me, I was teaching it to hundreds of others. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was from Keisha. "Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. I promise to pay it forward." I smiled and texted back, "That's all any of us can do." I thought about that dinner at Carol's penthouse, about being sent to the kitchen, about the humiliation and the pain. It felt like a lifetime ago now. That version of me, the one who'd walked out into the rain in tears, seemed like a different person, because I was a different person now. Not because of the money, but because I'd finally understood something fundamental. My worth was never determined by what Carol or Amanda or anyone else thought of me. It had always been there, just waiting for me to recognize it myself. And now? Now I spend my days helping other people recognize their own worth. I run my properties, I work my nursing shifts, I oversee the foundation, and every single day, I'm reminded that the measure of a person has nothing to do with where they came from and everything to do with what they choose to do with what they're given. Harry knew that, and he made sure I'd have the resources to prove it to the world. So yeah, Carol sent me to the kitchen that night. But what she didn't know was that she was sending away the woman who would end up owning the whole building. And that's not revenge, that's just justice. And that's my story. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I'd love to know where you're watching from. So drop your city in the comments below. And if you've ever been underestimated or judged unfairly, remember, your worth is not determined by other people's opinions. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.